that during that COVID time before we assembled for the first season, we were all over the world in different lockdowns, trying to get to know each other over those Zoom calls like everybody else was doing. And so one of the things Sam Harris, our head coach, ran was a failure CV process. So we would, rather than presenting a CV of your successes, you presented a CV of your sort of biggest failures or your toughest times and what you learned from it and what you took and what grew you. And that was a great process because when we had players talking about their why and their purpose and where they kind of came from and what was important to them and why they chose to come there. And the players talked about friends that they had lost and seen shot to death in front of them, and the players who had considered taking their own life in tough times and talking about this to people they barely knew, and people just really shared sort of some of their toughest moments really openly, and then how it made them who they are and got them to where they got to. And then you could see in the first game, when certain individuals scored their first try, everybody knew what they had gone through to get to that point and rushed to them, and you just saw that instant connection. So it was a really, really good process in terms of building a team. When it gets into the big moments, the deeper those bonds between people go and the deeper your belief and core sense of purpose is, then the higher chance of success, because it becomes about who cares deeply.
So today we're joined by Simon Thomas. How are you doing, Simon?
Good, thanks. Good to be here. Good to see you again.
You too, mate. You too. So for our viewers and listeners who maybe aren't familiar with yourself, would you mind giving us a little background about your experiences and your journey within high performance?
So yes, mostly rugby based in terms of background, and started through a strength and conditioning background, and now head of performance, currently based in Perth in Western Australia with the Western Force, and a couple of sort of performance consulting roles to the side with different rugby organisations and a couple of businesses internationally. And prior to here, I spent 2 years over in the US in startup mode in the MLR rugby competition that's emerging over there. Before that, I had 8 years at the Crusaders in Christchurch and with Canterbury in a very well-established environment. And then prior to that, in startup mode in Tasman and the NPC back in New Zealand as well. So bulk of experience in rugby, most of the experience in New Zealand. So consulting roles and different international roles, travelling with national teams, but also across a few different countries and different environments, which I've enjoyed the variation and the challenge.
Yeah, definitely. And that diversity of experience is something that will be really interesting to dive into today. To start off with, maybe we talk about one of the most important components within high performance, which is purpose. And the Crusaders, which you've mentioned you've worked with before, for those that don't know, are actually the world's most successful non-international professional rugby team. And they've won the Super Rugby title 4 years in a row. But from my understanding, you have a more personal connection to them. Would you be happy sharing it with us?
So I grew up in the area. So that was when they got established. That was my team growing up that I'd watch from the grandstand and run out every weekend and get autographs and things like that. And then, my very first work experience was with Ashley Jones sort of during a Canterbury season. And then when I was studying, I went down and did some observation at Canterbury and Crusaders training and decided that was the pathway that I wanted to go into. And so it always been a team that was pretty close to the heart for me. And then working in Tasman, we were attached and under the Crusaders banner as well. And then I had a godfather who we lost in the Christchurch earthquake. He was a board member with Crusaders as well. So, lots of sort of attachments along the way with the team while I was based in Nelson at the time. But I remember going to the first Crusaders home game post-earthquake in the new stadium and sort of just sitting up in the seats afterwards. And it was even at his funeral when he was carried out by some players and board members to the song the Crusaders run out to. I sort of decided that I was definitely going to work for that team if the opportunity came up. And I had 2 cracks at it before I got the head of performance role there and got it the third time. The first time I just was a bit too young and green and wasn't quite ready. The second time, Art Drury was working with Canterbury and he elevated to the Crusaders role from assistant to lead. And then I moved into the role that he vacated, and then I got my opportunity to take over the Crusaders program in 2017. So lots of little threads connecting myself and the organisation along the way. So, thoroughly enjoyed the time there. It was home and it was family, and it feels that way when I walk back in the door. As much as I love where I am right now, and it's a great challenge, but you certainly walk into a lot of hugs and handshakes and feel right at home whenever you go back in those doors as well.
That's awesome. Obviously, thank you for sharing as well. Sorry to hear about your goddad, but it sounds like you've got a really deep connection to the organisation. That's clear, but maybe we could start by understanding how, for those that maybe didn't grow up loving the club, loving the organisation, which is really well known across the Southern Hemisphere and even Northern within sport, how did you go about helping to create a deep sense of purpose and belonging within the Crusaders? Am I right in thinking at times you use the power of storytelling and a theme for each season?
Yeah, that's a big part of how that group operates. It goes back even further than sort of our era. I mean, I was working alongside Scott Robertson in my time there, leading. He came in as head coach, and I came in with him as head of performance. We'd worked together for Canterbury, and the narrative and theming and storytelling to bind everybody to a greater purpose that we all have deep understanding of and connection to was a part of what we'd done in the Canterbury environment, and it was something that he had an experience with when he was a player at the Crusaders and had Wayne Smith and Robbie Deans coaching him, and those coaches have created a lot of great coaches by coaching them, just through the way that they connect people to the purpose and pass over empowerment to the players that are there to lead as well as the coaches, and it just gets passed on down the chain. So a lot of people ask kind of what it is that makes that place so special, but it's sort of nothing magical. It's just you constantly go back and revisit the foundations of who are we, what does it mean, and one thing that we found in 2017, the group before us had laid some really good foundations but hadn't found success. The Crusaders had traditionally been very successful and won titles and 3-peats, and then went 8 years without winning a title. Lost a couple of finals closely along the way, but just didn't quite get across that hurdle. And we wanted to really revisit back to what made that team who it was in the first place. And the very first season that Crusaders played, they got last. And then the second season they played, they were sort of mid-table. And then they won 3 in a row. And there's a really good documentary with Wayne Smith just that goes back to what he came in. He found that people weren't connected to the team because it was an assembly of people from all over the country, and they didn't feel as much sort of passion and ownership of that team as what they did when it was Canterbury and it was local and tribal. So they needed to build that. They had some people turning up to the band that played pre-game and then leaving. They'd seen sometimes. So and so there just wasn't a sense of connection to the area and the community, and it wasn't just Canterbury only anymore. It was half the South Island, but people were 4 hours away and didn't feel connected to it. There was a lot of work done in investing, and I know Todd Blackadder, when he captained the team to their first title, sort of mentioned it's not just Canterbury, it's Tasman, and it's South Canterbury, it's Nelson, it's Marlborough, it's Mid Canterbury, it's all the areas sort of bound into it. And that team was really built as a culture and a family on like who they were and who was in it, and they had some real characters. They had some traditional sort of farm type workers in the side, but they had some real outlandish kind of characters in that team that brought some real value and individuality. And one thing that sort of happened that we looked back at is that led to a lot of success, and it became a template. And then as the demographic of the team changed and things evolved over time and the game moved, that organisation was trying to get success with what worked before. And it didn't necessarily exactly fit to those that were there in the now. And so we really wanted to dig back into, it's okay to bring your individuality. That doesn't mean that you're not a team player, you're not a team member. You are bringing your individuality to the team to grow it and make it more dynamic and expressive if that's who you are. And just being able to accept that as a part of teamness, individual taken away from the team. And so there were lots of little pieces like that we really wanted to dive into. And, we had a story and a narrative each year. And I've done a similar process with other teams before. One thing when I moved to Austin and Texas over in the MLR, we wanted to, we initially wanted to jump straight to the narrative and find a story. So, for example, Crusaders in 2017, Muhammad Ali, Rumble in the Jungle, hadn't had his title for a number of years, was old, too old, too slow, not going to get it back. George Foreman was going to knock him out. Went over to Africa and won his title back. And that was poetically, somehow, that's what we ended up doing. We ended up boarding a flight to South Africa and going into the heavyweight bout over there. So we were watching the Hurricanes play the Lions. We played our semi-final at home, 7 o'clock, finished at 9 o'clock, got home 11 o'clock. Those of us back to HQ. The Hurricanes Lions kicked off at midnight, and if the Hurricanes won, then they were going to come back and play us in Christchurch. If the Lions won, we were on the plane to Africa at 4 a.m. So at the airport at 4 for the plane at 6. So it was interesting. The Hurricanes were up by about 30 points at half time, and I started unpacking, and then the Lions came roaring back and won, and we were at the airport. But instead of being gutted to lose a home final and worried about having to fly to Africa to win a final that had never been done, because there was a purpose and a story, and it all kind of just somehow connected. Everybody was excited because the story's actually playing out, and so everyone believes, and it seems like it fits. And so you're able to do something that hadn't been done before because you believe that it's supposed to be. And so that was it was good. And then in Austin, we were going to apply a narrative straight away, but we found we'd just be picking a random story out of thin air and trying to jam it to fit. And so we needed to make it really authentic with a new team and an organisation that hadn't had success. They had a winless season, and then I think they'd run out of money twice, now 3 times, and doesn't exist anymore, but that's a whole other story in itself. So we wanted to dive down and make it really authentic, that everybody had moved to Austin and we were each other's chosen family because we'd chosen to be there, and looked and lived in with the Texas Rangers, and we wanted people to learn about the place that we were in and chose to come to and represent, and that helped us form our values. And then in the second season, we were able to progress that through into the Army Rangers and go and look at keeping some of our foundational values, but then extending them through into a different mindset, but keeping a similar narrative. And so that can often be sort of a common mistake, as you've themed in one environment, you assume it's going to work in another, or you just pull. There's an NFL team that won their first Super Bowl, and that'll work because we're trying to win our first one, but the organisations might not be the same, and so the story doesn't fit. So people don't really buy in and believe. We have to know who we are first, and then we find stories that connect with us and who we are, and then you feel the similarity and the threads that are there. So you're a really big part of the way of operating at Crusaders, and that evolved year on year and always had a different theme and a different narrative and a different story that tied a little bit to the last one but added to it, because you've always got to go back to the start of the mountain and start climbing again. If you just dance around on the top, you get knocked off pretty quickly.
Well, absolutely. And it's fascinating. You speak about how you do it, but would you mind explaining to the viewers and listeners what you saw in regards to the difference that storytelling and that powerful origin story, and mission made to the performance of the team? Yeah,
I think there's Andrew Gardner, who is the general manager of high performance at Crusaders, sort of meets it in one way where, there's times that culture trumps strategy, but culture is just what people do on a daily basis in your environment and how we operate. And it's the sort of the formal and the informal arrival into a group. You sort of get a formal induction, and there's words on the wall, and this is how we operate, and these are the rules. But then the informal induction is what you actually see, and are people actually living those? People has got keep tidy on the wall, and people are walking past rubbish on the floor. There's a formal induction, but the informal one that I'm learning from is that it's on the wall, but it doesn't matter. So by really tying in deeper and some work with this guy Michael Henderson, who studies culture around the world, who helped us with some theming with Canterbury, and we draw a lot out of how you stage theming in a story and make it believable or authentic. And you look at that story and think, it's not we want to be them, it's like, they're them and they're us, or this is who we are. And it's around, what does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it smell like? And so you have you pick songs that have lyrics and rhythms that you want to tie into, and then they mark key moments. And, you know, when you go back to those songs, it takes you back to a moment. You know, you smell something that your grandma used to cook for you every sort of Sunday. It takes you back to that moment. So it's just creating those pathways and that recognition of part of it is tying back to prior success. So you just get that feeling and deep belief like this works. And then you can weave it through. So it comes through in our language. It comes through in the imaging on the wall of the meeting room when we're doing our strength and conditioning programs. Like the language and the imaging on the programs ties into the theme. It's just your mini teams are named after it. Your clothing's it's got it. So it's something that sort of stays internal and special and within four walls until the campaign's over. But so you'll have there's lettering codes and things on your clothing that people from the outside don't know what it means, but you know. It's just it's saturating the environment with it, because then you just see the impact of belief and understanding, and people do what they say they're going to do because they believe they're a part of something bigger. If you step back, you look at how religion works, and that people want to be part of something greater. They believe in something greater. They believe that somebody's always watching, therefore they do things this way. And so it's they've got a purpose for the way that they go about their life, and they've got a deeper reason for it. And so that's what they commit to, and it gets you that difference between being committed and then, or just kind of turning up and doing what's on the schedule because it's on the schedule, or you're doing it because you really believe that it's going to work to get you where you want to go. And so there's compliance and commitment. So having that a really good alignment to your core purpose means you actually get commitment. I'm doing it for me instead of compliance. I'm doing it for you because you told me that I have to be here at 10 o'clock, or you told me I'm supposed to wear blue, so I'm wearing blue. Not I'm wearing blue because we've got a story around the ocean and the surge and the power. It's having that extra sort of layer of depth of understanding. So you see people doing what they say they're going to do and doing what they should be doing because it aligns, their actions align with their goals.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I guess for those listening who understand how crucial it is to have a higher sense of purpose within an organization or a team, you know, you've spoken about the power of storytelling there. If you had to give 3 key steps in being able to create that narrative that really truly aligns with the team and their beginnings and where they want to go and who they are and what they want to do, as you've said, what would those 3 key steps be if you can break it down?
It's probably a little bit dependent on where. So it would be a little bit different somewhere at Crusaders where you've got a good idea of what the identity is, but then you need to go back and revisit. Is it still relevant? And be really brutal and honest around if you're successful, but are you successful because of what you're doing or in spite of what you're doing? And then really strip that back and how you make that sustainable and then build on that. Well, this step 1 here at Western Force has been that it wasn't a high performance environment, and so there wasn't the right level of standards in there, and it's a team that's been through a rough time getting kicked out of Super and trying to survive and put back in, and things have fallen away because of that, and so you're sort of building and re-establishing. So step 1 is actually strip right back and go to bedrock and put those initial foundations back in place that they may have been there before and then eroded away. And in some organisations, they may not be there because they start up quickly and they just get up and running and rolling, and you're actually starting at square one. But probably step 1 is always kind of going back to step 1, regardless of where you are. It's just what it looks like is a little bit different. Go back and determine, do we know who we are? Do we know what our purpose is? And if we had one, is it still relevant? Is it relevant to us now? Is it relevant to where we're going? Or is it just something that we acknowledge as where we've been? And then now we move forward, and where do we move forward to? And then it's determining, so first you sort of know where you've come from, where you're at, and then where are we going? So what actually is our ambition? Because we can come in and want to put a core purpose in place that isn't necessarily what everybody there wants to get to, and it just becomes one person's purpose, and they're pulling on a rope trying to get everybody on board with something. If we had an owner of this team that just purely wanted the team to be taking part, and giving youth rugby players in Western Australia a bit of inspiration to kind of play the game, but more of a community growth focus, and didn't really care about winning Super Rugby, then we would approach things differently. But we've got an owner and a company and coaches and an organisation that wants to be successful, but just hasn't achieved it before and hasn't known what that looks like on a daily basis. That's it's sector is just making sure that we identify where we're going and that's where everybody wants to go. So, and then on the back of that, it's just putting the detail into place of how we actually put that into action. So then, okay, what does it look like when we establish standards? What are the words on the wall, or what is the image going to be that we put together that represents all of these things that we've decided are important to us, and to figure out who are we, what do we stand for, and how do we work? And then post that, then you can start to attach an external narrative, if that's helpful and when that becomes helpful. But until you really know who you are, it's hard to attach yourself to other people's stories. Otherwise, you are just pretending to be other people or other teams or other organisations and copy paste what they're doing. And it doesn't always fit.
I'm sure, yeah, I've seen that myself. In regards to that process that you've described there, how inclusive is it? You've obviously mentioned that you need to get a diverse input from the wider organisation to be able to truly reflect the story of all those that are there and make them feel like they belong. For companies or organisations that maybe have a few hundred or even thousands of people, how, and you may not necessarily have had to approach this challenge before, you may have, but how would you go about ensuring it isn't just the leadership group's perspective on who we are and where we want to go, and truly reflects the wider organisation?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's something that has a lot more moving parts the larger an organisation gets. Obviously, a smaller group, it's very easy to get everybody in one room and just align, and everybody can contribute. You get it done really quickly. By the time you're compiling 1,500 or 15,000 opinions, then that can take a long time if you try to do it in the same way. So the process of getting there has to be different, but everybody needs to at least be able to contribute in some way. It's just finding how you then delegate out and get you kind of get the key feedback through on the process. So everybody feels like they've had at least some part in the process of forming a strategy. And it's like anything, if we need to make a decision, as long as we've all been a part of the process, then we feel like we can align with what comes out of that process. So if I get to have my say and we talk about it and we choose to go in another direction, at least I know I've been heard. And some people have that mindset, some people don't. And so sometimes people don't survive in a team or in a company because they sometimes then can't put aside my individual goals for the greater good, and sometimes you kind of can. So it's not something that works perfectly by any means at all times, but it's trying to find, I think, an avenue for people to be able to have a voice and feel at least like they've been heard, and then to be able to decide and commit and get everybody on board. And then if you see it in your processes and the way that you operate every day, and that's genuinely how your team, how your company kind of runs, and that's what we're measured on, then it becomes a lot more tangible and a lot easier across a larger group or larger scale. It's a good book. I think when The Sport Takes Care of Itself, when Bill Walsh went in and took over the San Francisco 49ers and took sort of standard of performance, and when he was pretty detailed and sat across a lot of it himself and burnt himself to the ground in doing it, which isn't always the best way to go about it, but it's the way that some do. And then the ability to be able to delegate that out sometimes comes later. But that was everything from how they trained on the field to how people answered the phone, and just making sure that you've got an understanding and a purpose that you're aligning to, and you're representing the organisation in the same way. And I mean, if you can walk into an organisation and ask, no matter who is involved, what is the core purpose of this organisation and what are the three important components, you should get the same answer from everybody. And how that applies in context is sometimes different, but people should know that, even whether that's a team of 5 or a team of 500 or 5,000. I know the story of the the janitor at NASA, say, what's your job? He doesn't say clean the floors. It's I help put someone on the moon. If people understand that what they do flows on down to the greater purpose, and even in a sporting environment, we work constantly to make sure that the people selling the tickets and sponsorships, and they all feel like they're a part of what the team is doing on the field, and that the team is actually representing those people working, for the organisation as well, but don't get to put on the jersey in the same way that the fans do. But we'd always done that in a sporting environment by when we have our theme. Is bringing everybody in. So when you launch your theme, and everybody gets excited about what's this year's story, and what is our theme, what's our narrative, and every year it would go up and up. So that within the team room as a roughly cut together video, and then the next year there's a bit more production in behind it, and there's someone who's a more Morgan Freeman impersonator doing the narrative over the video, and then another year it's at the movies, and there's a cocktail event and partners dinner afterwards. Every year it just snowballs. But you have your staff and your partners and your families and your players, and everybody's there and everybody's a part of it. Everyone kind of knows they're on that journey. And then when you work in that purpose, you make sure that you include everybody in it so that they feel included. And that's just it's just a human need to connect and to be a part of something. And so we can utilise that to help everybody feel like they are a part of that process. Yes, exact detail as it gets bigger and bigger. A hard one to explain. I haven't operated it. It's probably something outside a few hundred people. So once you get up in the thousands, there'll be some good, intelligent operators out there who have done that I could learn from, and would maybe answer that question with a bit more detail. But that's how we do it within a team in a sporting organisation environment.
Nice answer with true Kiwi humility.
Don't always know. Yeah, you might actually know. The military is a bit larger than what we go in terms of sport teams. Is there something that you've seen that you would add to that?
I think, to be totally honest, I was involved with smaller scale than thousands of thousands. So to be able to offer insights on that, it would be, just as you said, not something that I've experienced. Having said that, there's obviously ways that you can, like you said, delegate and have levels to this. And I guess a big part, as you've said, is ensuring people feel heard and trying to establish within your culture what that looks like, and logistically how that could be achieved is probably the biggest challenge. Because once, as you've said, you've gathered those opinions and those thoughts, as long as that change management process is then managed well and people feel they have the awareness of the need for change, the desire for it, the knowledge, the ability, the reinforcement, I don't think the principles, and this is again just based off my opinion, it's not necessarily true. Like I say, I haven't worked with 10, 15,000 people. I think the principles are largely the same, right? Because it's still a group of people. It's a high performing team of teams ultimately, and whether that's 200 or whether that's 2,000, as you've said, we all have that innate need for connection and belonging. And if you're trying to achieve something really ambitious and pioneering, irrespective of the size of the organization, you have to obviously create that sense of connection and belonging.
Yeah, I think it's probably just a larger scaled version of what we would do in a mid-size environment. Anyway, you decentralize into pods, and each pod has leadership function, and as long as you are heard by your leader, then they talk and collaborate and feed upwards till it gets to the mothership. And then I think the part that sometimes gets missed is closing the loop, and then the feeding back down and actually saying, here's what we've heard, here's what we're going to do, here's where we're going. And I think it's because if you don't really hear back, this is what we've heard, and that's where you get that loop of like, why'd you ask anyway? It was just lip service asking us, but you already knew, so you might as well just present. And so being able to kind of close the loop on that, whether it's small, medium or large, through different ways of doing it, is probably one of the bits that holds that process together.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, we've all seen, experienced and heard of just surveys, annual surveys being filled out and never hearing, seeing, understanding what our answers have helped to create or to change. And the thing that I notice more often than not these days is it's largely that change management process that's where a lot of companies and organizations fall down in being able to actually create something like this and being able to sustain it. And, I had a really interesting conversation with an expert in this space, which went along the lines of, in her words, you either spend X amount of time understanding the climate, setting the scene for change, and ensuring that people have the awareness and desire to do it, or you spend 10x trying to reinforce it. And I guess with this, when you are trying to really create a organization-wide understanding of who we are, where we're going, what that looks like, what's the narrative behind it, how can we connect to that whole change management process is going to be crucial, as you've said, to ensure people don't just feel like they're being asked for their opinion and then it's still the leadership group who are the ones deciding who we are and where do we go, and ultimately it's an exercise in futility.
Which can be all too common as a process, and the asking for ideas or feedback just becomes a tick box process that doesn't really get utilized at all, but people can see through that pretty quickly and feel like they don't feel like they've really been heard or had input into where the organisation's heading, therefore feel disconnected, and then it can snowball from there.
And you've also spent 3 years with the Maori All Blacks. Would you mind explaining to the viewers and listeners who this team are, for those that maybe aren't familiar, and your role there in connecting everyone to the origin story, the vision and the mission?
Yeah, it was a great experience. It was different for me too. So Māori All Blacks, obviously the best rugby players in New Zealand at any given time get selected for the All Blacks and play for the national team. And then below that, sometimes there's a sort of a second tier team of guys that don't quite make the All Blacks, but they're still sort of developing. And in most years, there's a Māori All Black team of players who still some of the best players in the country, but haven't been selected for the All Blacks that year, but have heritage as Māori. And so there's a mix in there of there's Māori Samoan and Māori Tongan, but everybody has a Māori background that they can sort of trace back and prove in terms of whakapapa and lineage and their family history to play for that team as a staff member. It's ideal, but it's not compulsory. So myself and a few others don't have any sort of Māori background in terms of our family history, but we're just chosen as high performance operators that would be good to work with that team and deliver a high performance environment for that team, which is usually a touring team. So it's a really good environment. It's a good experience. So there was a real mix of individuals within that environment. But the one thing that tied them all together was that they were all Māori, and so there was a lot of you took away your Kamatua, so Luke Crawford would come away as a spiritual counsel and advisor and cultural advisor, and you learned a lot about Māori culture and within that environment, like through haka, through song, through storytelling. Māori culture is a very oral culture, a very narrative and storytelling culture, and things are passed down through storytelling. So it's a really, really good environment to be involved in terms of learning more about the history of New Zealand or Aotearoa and Māori language and culture and food, and it was great. It was a great learning experience for me. You have to intertwine yourself with others when you join that group through speaking in Māori and talking about who you are and where you've come from. And when you introduce yourself that way, you don't start with yourself, you finish with yourself. So some will go all the way back to their waka that arrived and where their whole family history had come through, and talk about their great-grandparents, grandparents, parents, their kids, dogs, whoever, and some might go back generations. So some could spend 15, 20 minutes talking about their whole history of who came before they then say, and my name is this. And so that's just a concept within that culture that you learn from. And others are pretty quick and short and sharp. And then each year you build on it and you grow. So yeah, a lot of really good cultural learning and understanding within that group, which is very different. But it's definitely one that you don't need to create a core thread that holds everybody together, because it's there, and it's something that everybody that is in there and involved is incredibly proud of, and it's woven through the jersey and it's through the language, and so it's instant theming because it's already there, and the connection and core purpose is there, and then it's just about growing it. So yeah, so definitely and some environment to be involved in, and I learned a lot in my time there, which was great.
A really special one to be a part of, I'm sure. And you've mentioned some words there, things like whakapapa and even whānau. I was fortunate to have a very loving upbringing, but I mean, within 2 weeks of living and working in New Zealand, I actually felt more connected to the local community than any I'd ever grown up in over the past 23 years. You've spoken about that deep cultural heritage of the Maori culture and of New Zealand. What do you think New Zealand gets so right in regards to connection, and how do you think other ambitious teams can utilise that powerful force?
I don't think, it's probably not all of New Zealand always gets it right all the time. But you could ask anybody who was stranded overseas during COVID that maybe didn't quite go so well for some. I think there's just I think having a tribal background that sort of establishes some of the culture and how community works. And one thing I've found is a stark contrast from living and working in New Zealand and then living and working in the US, from somewhere so small to somewhere so huge. It's a small country. There's less people, there's less resource. Therefore, you learn to take care of what you have and who you have, and make the most of what's around you, and look after people and resource to get the best out of them or it. Whereas on a grander scale and larger countries and larger structures, sometimes it gets lost in just the scale of everything, or there's so many people available that people become expendable and just become a product. And so within a small core sort of a culture, you learn to take care of who you have and what you've got. And so a part of it comes from that. And then you even just see the sense of community and connection and the feeling of home, because everything's small and close and isolated in a little corner of the world where you got to make the most of it. And so it's hard. It's probably hard to describe when it's your normal, like when it's sort of all you've known, because it's sort of where you've grown up. Sometimes we'll get into different environments and different cultures, and they'll say, "Oh, how'd you come up with like that as a concept?" Or like, it's normal. So it's normal to me, is what I should say. And it's just something that you learn, and it's kind of ingrained in terms of those characteristics or those sort of things. I guess it's probably quite well explained in Belonging in the book. It was a good book to read around culture and cultural building, and talks a bit about whakapapa and talks about connection, and but I don't think it's all necessarily completely from Māori culture, but having that woven through definitely helps to sort of strengthen it the more you kind of learn in that space. But yeah, I don't know if it's just even those that colonised that came all the way across, and because they made such a big decision, they had to make the most of it. And so you had to get your hands dirty and you had to make it work, and people chose to move there to create a better life or an opportunity for family generations down the line. And so that's kind of something that you learn, like when you're working, you're not only working for yourself today, like you're always planting the seed that will be the tree that gives shade to somebody in the future. And so you water that seed, and then the next person looks after the tree, and someone down the road, you won't be around when the shade is there, but somebody's going to benefit from it. And there's always a bit of that to it.
Yeah, definitely. And, it's not quite as eloquently put as what you've said there, but when I used to come back to the UK, Christmas, and people would ask what it was like, I'd explain that if you're, in Kiwi terms, a good bugger, they take you in like family. If not, you're on the next bus out of there. And it's very protective of those values. It was a breath of fresh air. And, like I say, I had an amazing upbringing, very fortunate. But I grew up in an area just south of of London called Surrey, which I call the land of white Range Rovers. And unfortunately, you know, for all the money that's there and the lovely houses, you know, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, you know, loneliness is an epidemic. And I don't think I ever experienced loneliness. You know, I had great friends and great family, but just a connection to community was missing. And I don't think I necessarily realized the power of that and what it could do and how it could galvanize a group until I moved and spent those 3 years in New Zealand working in high performance. And, you know, it was eye-opening. And I think it's been really formative now with the work that I do, and a big part of why I want to help give back that experience to companies with an ambitious mission.
Yeah, I'd say there's potentially a bit of a generational shift. Like, I know if you sort of think around your grandparents growing up there, I think if there was like a community and there was if a sign fell over in the community, they kind of knew that it was part of the community. So anybody walking past might put it up and fix it up. And potentially that's not really the case now. Like, people are probably ripping down signs to just to cause damage sometimes. So it's not, it's interesting. But you go back to some of the core values that are there, and sometimes it's just low fences instead of high fences. Just there's communities where you don't even lock the door. And it's been a sort of an interesting transition from a tribal community based environment where, you know, everybody looks after one another, and, you know, everybody's raising everybody's kids sort of scenario, versus, you know, now we've got houses and everyone's got a fence, and like, don't come on my yard because that's where like the boundary there, and like, you've got to trim your trees back because your leaves are falling on my garden, sort of thing. So it's an interesting there's a shift there towards creating isolation to have what is mine that then disconnects you from community. And so there's but then there's obviously a balance there, because if we all just sort of lived on one big plot of land, I don't know how that would go in this day and age, but you never know. We might end up going back to it anyway. Who knows? It could all be cyclical. But you say it only takes going for a tour to go over and play in Fiji, and, you know, you don't see fences between houses, and the houses don't have 6 different bedrooms. You know, there's one building and everybody in the family sleeps in that one building, in that one room, and those buildings are all, they don't have fences between them, and everybody just interacts, and it's a community that works together and helps each other. And so it's a different way of life, and it's not a convenient way of life sometimes, but it's definitely a way of life that brings people together. And you look at Fiji playing in the World Cup now, and you see a team that knows who they are and has a core purpose and are very connected to themselves and their community and what they're there for. And I think even going back to the last World Cup, I remember watching that and thinking South Africa almost looked like the only team in that World Cup that were there for a bigger purpose. And you watch Chasing the Sun, and you get a bit of insight into, you know, through that sort of multi-part series, of, you know, who they were and what they were playing for and what was important, and just the little details of the names that were in the numbers on the back of the jerseys, and the way that Siya Kolisi would speak after games and talk about after they won the final. And there was a real sense there that they looked like a team who knew who they were and what they were there for, and were connected to a greater purpose. And other teams just looked like they were assembled to go there and play rugby. And so when it gets into the big moments, the deeper those bonds between people go, and the deeper your belief and core sense of purpose is, then the higher chance of success, because it becomes about who cares deeply. And especially when talent is relatively level in a World Cup final as the 2 best teams at the tournament. England may have played their final the week before and not quite got back up for the final, or who knows. But I remember watching that, thinking, and every week, and just looking at the words spoken, and you can tell, and you can see, and you can hear. Maybe it's because I've been in environments where I've seen what it looks like, so I recognize it coming through, just the way people speak with conviction and belief, and it's not fake it till you make it, like they truly believe. I don't know, but I think when you really have that core sense of purpose and community, you can see it and hear it coming through.
Oh, that's awesome. You know, we've spoken a lot about purpose and developing that sense of connection within the organization. I'd like to move now on to the people side of it. And talk about how you approach identifying and developing world-class talent within the organisations that you've been in. New Zealand rugby especially is known for the phrase "good people make good All Blacks," alongside the slightly less subtle "no dickheads" policy of the All Blacks too, which I think a lot of people within rugby will know. How do you screen the values of players or staff when hiring? And how could teams and companies ensure they're hiring people who share the team or organisation's values?
Yeah, it's something that's so critical because everything comes from people. Like we're in a people business. So and I remember the way that the academy would go through in terms of talent ID. So they would identify on talent, and then you would sort of recruit on character, but then you're sort of retaining based on fit and mindset, and then what you see in that character and actions. There's always high talent individuals out there, but you can't always afford to have somebody in that if they're in that category of high talent and low character, because in a team sport or something where you're interacting with a lot of other people, then you need to have the ability to have cohesion and interaction and collaborate. And you can't just be an isolated, highly talented operator. And in some fields you can. In some fields that's where, those people fit. Those people aren't evil. They just fit better in different environments. And they can be incredibly outstanding operators in some fields who really shift things forward. But they don't tend to fit within the environments that I'm operating in and within team sport, and all tend to last long, and they might get to the top very quickly but not stay there. So the way that people are, and then the way that we look after people, and the way that we can grow people and empower people to grow themselves, it becomes the growth of your organisation as a sum of all of its parts, which is its people, and the multiplier effect that you've got of all those people, good people working together and kind of getting things done. So a crucial part for us is getting the people right. And so that, as people say, that the right people in the right seats on the bus. Sometimes you have a person who is just in the wrong role, and their skill set don't fit their role. And so you just got to determine whether they would be better fit in a different role, and then they could be excellent in your environment, or they just may not fit in your environment because the role that they're suited to is already full or doesn't exist. And so for some people it's just the wrong people in the wrong place at the time, and some people sometimes it's right person, right place, right time. In terms of the recruitment of people, it's something that we're looking at the moment in terms of growing our performance staff and having there's a technical skills focus to the applied sort of performance scientist role that we're looking to fill. But we need that person to be a people person too. They're going to be forming relationships with universities. They're going to be mentoring students. They have to work operationally with a number of departments. And you can be a very, very good data nerd, but with no people skills, and then find it hard to get the message across. So they need to have social skills and people skills too. Otherwise, you can just have a very tech-focused person who's excellent in terms of data and graphs, but just can't communicate. There's a lot of different elements that we need to find around the people that we have, and then just finding the right fit.
Yeah, absolutely. Not jamming a square peg in a round hole, I guess, if we're using an analogy for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and sometimes that's a part of leadership. And I think the way that some people term it in their environment, like sometimes if you can't change the man, you need to change the man. And so if you can't evolve someone, or that person can't evolve into what they need, then you just change the person in that role. And with a dynamic and fast-moving environment, sometimes you have time to grow someone into a role, and sometimes you don't. And sometimes it's our fault for throwing someone in the deep end without preparing them, and that's something that we need to be aware of and be accountable for too, because I think that's something a lot of people have seen. And I've heard a lot over here in Australian rugby compared to New Zealand rugby, is young, talented kids coming up, get thrown straight into the starting spot, and then struggle with the pressure because they don't put support around them. They throw them on the scrap heap and put the next one in and do the same thing over and over and churn players out. And it's very easy to do that in sport or business. So it's a crucial part of what we do, because culture is what people do. And so whether you're working on purpose or culture, all of our output comes from people. So it's the most important resource that we have.
Without a doubt. And what you've mentioned there around maybe an imbalance between challenge and support. It's reminded me, and unfortunately I can't remember who it was. It was a lecturer at Loughborough University, which is a pretty well established high performance sport university over here, and his research had found great leaders, they have three main elements, and this is me just quoting his, this isn't anything I've come up with. The first, a larger than life vision that unites the team, but then also equally challenge to grow, and also the support to go with that. And yeah, like you've said, you so often see people maybe who take a step into a role and maybe they have all the right values and, you know, they have certain skills, but the environment isn't such that allows them to thrive and to grow. And I guess that's what you're relating to there, isn't it? It's as much about creating a right environment for that person to thrive. And, you know, the stuff that we've spoken about, like connection and belonging, as it is finding the right person in the first place, because we all know if the environment isn't right, the best talent is going to be the one that leaves first, because ultimately they don't need to be a part of something like that.
Yeah, I saw something, I think it was on LinkedIn, I was just reading through, and somebody talking about as businesses grow and scale too, where you say you've got a highly creative person in a startup and they're a real creator, and they create and develop something, and then and they can be the CEO and the creator when it's small. And then when it grows, as it gets layers and levels, they don't necessarily have sometimes do, but often don't have the skill set to be the CEO of a multi-thousand person company. And so then it's okay to step away and hire someone with a CEO skill set of a larger company and go back to being a creator, because that's what you're really good at. And you either go back to a creative role within the company, or you go and create something else. And so it's finding what that fit is. And say some people have that dual skill set and some people don't. And someone might be an incredible CEO of a large company and then go and try and start up their own one, and they don't have the skill set to get something started as a little 5-person band trying to create something from the ground up, because they're a facilitator and they empower people and they delegate, and there aren't people there to do that with, so nothing gets done. And so there's different, certainly different skill sets. It's like the story of everybody seems to see the career as a career as the ladder, and so the best salesperson now then goes up to being a manager, but they might not be a very good manager. They're just an exceptional salesperson over here. So how do we broaden that out, but keep them where they are great, and put a great manager alongside them to help them grow in that role? And but we're taught about that climb, and so you come in and you sort of do the early hours and the opening and closing, and then you're the top salesperson, then you should be the manager, and then you should be the general manager, then you should be the CEO, and we all see it as this pyramid or this ladder that we're sort of supposed to climb. And it's the same in sport. You sort of think, right, I'm going to work with an academy, and then an NPC, and then a super, and then an international team, or what's after that? The world team, then the galaxy team. Those don't exist. There's somewhere you sort of find where you are actually best suited and best fit, and then it becomes a decision of do you branch outside sport, because your skill sets are quite translatable across, and people have skill sets that can transcend across sport and business and different environments, and or are you just still trying to kind of climb that ladder and find your way up through the same organization? Or do you choose to, you're rolling, you like the rolling, you just move around the world doing the same job but in a different tracksuit? So there's lots of different avenues that you kind of go to down the career sports path, and where you sort of choose to stay in the game or move away from it and take some transferable skill sets elsewhere. So it probably deviates away from talking about people, but it's the things that people do, and it's finding where people fit and how to get the best out of people. And that's always been an approach of mine through evolution and growth and learning in the roles that I've been in, and coming out of university and knowing all of the technical side of strength and conditioning and seeing everybody as athletes, and then growing over time, and then you learn to see everybody as people first, and they're a person first, and then they're a rugby player second, and athlete third, because you can make them a better athlete without them being a better rugby player or a better person. So have you really influenced performance in their sport or in life? And and you sort of start to connect on that personal level and look to know people as people and treat people and grow people as people. And then the other parts then fall into alignment after that.
Yeah, without a doubt. And it's so easy, isn't it, to sort of compartmentalize someone as they're a rugby player or they're a CEO or they're an analyst, and not to look at the whole and not to understand actually what that person needs, what are the conditions, what's the challenge, what's the support, what's their understanding and connection to the vision, and to be able to empathize as a leader or even just as a peer to provide people with those conditions. And it's something that requires a fair amount of work and humility and empathy and time, isn't it? And I guess that's the beauty of sport, is you have a lot of time together. I've spoken to a lot of previous colleagues when I worked with the military, and they were working within small special forces units, going off and doing stuff in parts of the world for months at a time together, and they said they had the luxury of time to be able to develop that deep level of connection. But it requires a more purposeful approach, I think, within a business, within an organization where you don't have that time together. And that's why these conditions are so crucial, because you can't afford to just let time be the builder of purpose or the builder of people coming together and connecting.
Yeah, I think one thing I've found, not just here at the Western Force thing or in a Rugby Australia thing, but when we play against New Zealand teams, I get reminded of what sort of those strong connections between people look like. And so we probably had a group here last year, just stepping back on observation, that almost so like workmates, not teammates, and so almost go from like workmates to teammates to close mates, and that's the time you get to spend together and the emphasis within sport. And so we had we had clock in, clock out athletes, and they didn't really look like, they didn't hate each other, there was no fighting or anything, but they didn't look like they were really tight either. And so, we just know that within our business, that's something that's so crucial. And so it's been a real focus and an emphasis on how we can facilitate that. And some of that is creating opportunities for people to connect, encouraging it, making sure the environment's there for them to actually do it. Do they have a space that they can actually just bump into each other informally and get to know each other? Or is the schedule so stacked and then there's nowhere for them to really talk to each other, so that's why they leave? Or here is it that the beach is just down the road, so they want to go recover at the beach. So how do we facilitate some connection around that? And sometimes you force it in to start, and you have to put sort of structures in place to get people to do how to. Can't throw them the keys without teaching them how to drive. And then you start to create open space and start to let it happen organically. And it's even looking at some of the research around product placement in stores and the way that we want to put more steps between people and the things that we don't want them to do, and less steps between people and the things we do want them to do, and how you create a workflow and create an environment where where they end up sitting down and spending most of their time becomes their connection space. And if you build a connection space but it's a 10-minute walk away, then they might not go and use it just specifically for that purpose. So where do you put that place that you get those organic collisions between people and you facilitate it? Then you take away the structure but leave the space and the encouragement for it to happen organically. And so it's been a really good process just to sort of try things in that space and watch it grow and see the group kind of connect a little bit more. We're going away on tour to South Africa recently helps, because it's even more time together. We're captured in an environment for 2 weeks where they're living in each other's pocket, and any longer than 2 weeks people will start to get a bit scratchy at each other because it's a bit too much. But you actually get the benefit of a lot of time together if you know how to use it wisely, and if you know not to overfill it, because people still need time to themselves, and some people need to recharge in the quiet, and others recharge in a group, and trying to create space for that as well. So, but you certainly can't assume that it's just going to happen if you throw a bunch of people in a room and just tell them to get to know each other. There's ways to find specifically for your group what might work and what might connect them, and where they find common ground and how they get to know each other. That they're not a rugby player, they're a father and a brother and a husband and a dog owner but who plays rugby. So you get to know a little bit more about the person and what brought them here. Part of our process over in Austin, we started, it was sort of during COVID. So one of the reasons I chose to leave the Crusaders and go to the US was just to get outside the comfort zone and challenge and get away from somewhere that I was like it was comfortable but at risk of becoming complacent, because things do run so well and we had such good people and there were other people there who, it was their time to have an opportunity. So it was good to step out of their way and let them grow into it and take over. But also just to get, New Zealand was, it was open but caged, and then it became closed again. And every time I landed back into New Zealand, to be honest, I ended up going back into some sort of lockdown. For better or for worse, Texas was wide open, and the US was a great experience. Obviously, they did things very differently in terms of managing that time, and it didn't potentially go so well for them when you look at some of the numbers. But the opportunity to go and live a different lifestyle, which a lot of us chose to do, it meant that during that COVID time before we assembled for the first season, we were all over the world in different lockdowns, trying to get to know each other over Zoom calls like everybody else was doing. And so one of the things Sam Harris, our head coach, ran was a failure CV process. So we would, rather than presenting a CV of your successes, you presented a CV of your sort of biggest failures or your toughest times and what you learnt from it and what you took and what grew you. And those allowed people to really get to know each other on a deeper level before even seeing each other. And even our first few months together, it was all masks, so no one really knew what everyone looked like in 3D. And when the masks first came off, it was like, oh, that's your face in real life. But that was a great process, because when we had players talking about their why and their purpose and where they kind of came from and what was important to them and why they chose to come there. And, the players talked about friends that they had lost and seen, shot to death in front of them, and players who had, considered taking their own life in tough times and talking about this to people they barely knew. And so, when some of these, some of it was failing at university and some of it was failing at life, and people just really shared sort of some of their toughest moments really openly, and then how it made them who they are and got them to where they got to. And then you could see in the first game, when certain individuals, scored their first try, everybody knew what they had gone through to get to that point and rushed to them, and you just saw that instant connection. So it was a really, really good process in terms of building a team.
Without a doubt. And I'm sure everyone, watching and listening to this would understand the value of people demonstrating that vulnerability to create a sense of connection. I guess the thing that I'd like to delve into off the back of that is, it requires an environment where people feel a high level of psychological safety to be able to express their failures, let alone their deepest, darkest sort of vulnerabilities. How did you go about creating an environment where people felt willing to share those kinds of experiences with others?
Yeah, I think it was probably something that grew. Like the first couple were probably a bit more relatively sort of surface level, and then and I know and then a couple of the coaches went quite deep to the point of tears and sharing theirs, and then that made others feel okay with doing the same. And it sort of takes the first person to do it, and then the acceptance of that first person doing it, and then the first follower, and then the second follower, and then it comes along like that. The video of that person dancing on the hill, and like there's sort of the leader, but the leader just becomes an isolated crazy person if no one follows. And then so the real key is that first follower who makes it okay for that person to be doing it, and then it becomes 5 and then 10, and then everybody's dancing on this hill like little kids in the rain. And so it's finding a way to go through that process and actually be able to, let's say, first lead by showing that example of it, and then lead by the acceptance of that, even if it's getting somebody to go out of their comfort zone and do something new. Or actually, one thing we've been working on here is like the ability to put yourself out there and compete to win when losing is a possibility. The fear of failure and the fear of losing and the fear of punishment if you lose, which gets ingrained in us, kind of growing up, how we can circumvent that by showing that, by accepting amongst the first person who actually goes out and tries hard, doesn't get laughed at for trying too hard, but that gets embraced and celebrated, and the first person who shows that vulnerability and goes that little bit deeper, then everything that gets accepted, and then somebody else does it, and then it kind of grows from there. So that would be I guess that was the process that evolved, and I'd say it was semi structured, and whether Sam prompted a few people to go a little bit deeper, and you have a plan that somebody's going to go a little bit deeper today. Let's make sure we really emphasize that we support them, and then it kind of grows from there. So you create that safe environment for people to go outside their comfort zone and whatever it may be.
Yeah, fascinating. So it sounds like you had your early adopters, but you also targeted, I guess, for lack of a better term, the cultural architects too, maybe, and had a conversation with them about the power that them expressing these vulnerabilities could have for the team and what that could do, and that they were going to be supported if they felt that they were happy expressing those things.
Yeah, and sometimes you get a read on that within an environment, and this was harder to do because you're on Zoom, but in a daily environment, when you're around each other, like, you kind of know, there will be people in the group or people in the room who, if somebody goes sort of off the reservation a little bit, and people kind of look to that person to see how that person responds, and then their response then determines everybody else's response, and that's something that you often sort of really need to be really aware of. And sometimes in a leadership position, sometimes it's just as a head coach or head of performance, whatever it might be, that you want to dig deeper with somebody and get vulnerability and honesty from them. But like, if you hold the keys to their career, they're very often going to tell you what they think you want to hear, and that's a really hard barrier to break down. And how you create a space in a room where they are not just trying to impress or trying to get selected or trying to get another contract or whatever it might be. They're always very often going to tell a head coach what they want to hear, because they control their destiny in a way. And what's important to them, your boss, your CEO, your manager, your general manager, whatever it might be. And that's a tough position to be in sometimes, because you can genuinely care and you can genuinely ask and probe and really want to know, but you may not always get a fully honest answer back until you've found a way to create that environment where somebody does feel safe, that they can answer honestly and truly, that there's no consequence of that's going to be negative, or they're not taking away the opportunity of a positive outcome. And so that's a tough thing to navigate sometimes.
Yeah, without a doubt. And there'll be a lot of ambitious leaders listening to this thinking this all sounds fantastic, but building a world-class team requires, a huge budget. But actually, if we use, for example, New Zealand rugby as an example here, I mean, if you look at the salary cap side of things, it pays worse than 5 other competitions worldwide, but it's consistently up there and is the most successful international rugby team of all time. And I'd argue, and I think that the stats show, although there's been, you could argue, a recent dip, one of the most successful sports teams on an international level of all time. Firstly, what do you think keeps most New Zealand players in New Zealand, albeit there will be some that leave to, France, England, Japan, where they are looking for a higher amount of money. But there's still a real core group that stay within New Zealand. And secondly, how can companies and teams retain their best talent without having to pay them more than the rest?
Yeah, I think sort of going back a step, another good read in terms of the environment, not necessarily having to be highly resourced. You read Ben Ryan's book, or you look into Fiji Sevens and their sort of path to Olympic gold, and you look at like in that environment, how you can have world-class people, world-class processes and effort and mindset within a lot lower resource, but just doing the basics really well relentlessly. And I think that's something that I've found in my experience in New Zealand teams, that most of the successful teams there pride themselves on there too, is just do the basics well relentlessly without getting bored of the things that work. And so there isn't a magic solution that it's, you could put into place a $500 million facility, but it may not match your outcome if your people and your processes aren't right and your culture and environment's not right. So you kind of go people and culture and processes, and then you add those things to elevate that. And I guess there's always been there's an element of the power of the hold of the black jersey. Currently, you still can't play for the All Blacks without playing within New Zealand. I think that is a personal opinion that's probably is depowered a little bit now from where it may have been in the past. I think now there's you see with players, there's a potential point where they might have played between 5 and 15 tests. They've got enough All Black on their CV to get a really good paycheck elsewhere to fund their family. And, do you stick around for another 3 years to get another 5 tests, or do you go now and get paid twice, 3 times as much and give your family or yourself another cultural experience? And so there's players that leave for financial reasons because it's a job and it's a career, and they've got bills to pay and mouths to feed and families to look after and futures to put away for with this small window that they've got as a player to make a living. But then there's others that want to challenge themselves. Whanganukau's at the peak of his powers at Crusaders and All Blacks at the moment, but you listen to him after Super Rugby and like, why are you leaving now? Because he wants to dominate the world. He's dominated the South now, and he wants to go dominate the North. And then after that, he'll probably want to then go find another challenge and try the NRL or the NFL or boxing like Sonny. And I know it's something that people really struggled with Sonny Bill Williams going cross code rugby to league and trying boxing, but that's just someone who likes to challenge himself and he wants to find, you reach a peak and you want to go and find a new challenge and challenge yourself again. And some people just don't understand that. They just think you're chasing money, or they think you're just flitting around randomly, but really you're just seeking a way to challenge and grow yourself. And so, but it's something that you manage to get to do, I think, within New Zealand. One thing that helps is players that have gone overseas and think the grass is greener and sometimes don't find it that way. There's players that have left New Zealand and gone to Japan and expected it to be like New Zealand, and it's not, and then they struggle. You go to France and you expect it to be like New Zealand, and it's not, and they struggle. And if you don't speak French, too bad, you better learn. And you're playing a lot more games in a year and you're paid a lot, but they expect a lot in return. And so the players are well looked after as people in New Zealand. I think the Players Association do a good job of making sure of that, but so do the organisations, because they see the value. But again, I think a big part of it, we could potentially go and try and pay somebody more money to bring them across from the Crusaders or the Chiefs or the Blues, but they love where they are, and their families there, and that's the purpose at Crusaders when we came and took the reins in 2017, was to make sure that it was, it went back to and continued to be a place that everybody wants to be and no one wants to leave. And that's because it feels like home and it feels like family, and you just have that sense of belonging there. And so it's I still see that in some New Zealand teams. You have a Luke Romano who turned down multiple contracts to go and play in France because he just loves his farm in Christchurch, and he flies people in and takes them on hunting tours and all sorts, and that's just where he wants to be. Others, everyone has their own reasons, I guess, and some of them are different, but there are examples of people that others follow in New Zealand that have stayed for reasons that resonate. Sam Whitelock's done a sabbatical but stayed in New Zealand because he wants to pass Richie McCaw's record and get a milestone and be the most capped All Black ever. And Wyatt Crockett stayed at the Crusaders to become the most capped Super Rugby player ever. And so there's things like that people attach some real meaning to, that have value to them, that they stay for. And then post that, they either choose to leave the game or stay in the game. And there's certainly players that go away and then come back because they just miss the way that it is in New Zealand and the brotherhood that there is within their team, or the just the feeling of home. So New Zealanders have always been travellers because we're so isolated. We travel the world, but usually come home. and people always want to return home. So it's there's that real feeling of home that I think sits quite heavily with a number of players that keeps them there. And as I say, even the jersey feels a little bit devalued in terms of someone wanting to leave after 15 tests if they don't feel like they can reach 50. If someone wants to stay and become a 100 test All Black, then that's what they commit to. A Dan Carter talking about, you don't just want to be an All Black, you want to be a great All Black. And so there's a lot of that within it. I say it can be very individual, but it seems to be that feeling of home and just the way that things are, people just love, and they don't want to leave it, or they want to go for a short period of time and really want to come back to it. Yeah, there's probably elements of wanting to be an All Black for some, but for others, I think most that I've worked alongside anyway, when I've heard them talk about why they've turned down contracts or why they've chosen to come back, it's either to hit a significant milestone that's important to them or their family, or it's just to want to feel like they're at home.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess that level of connection and belonging, we've spoken about purpose, we've spoken about people. The last question I'd like to ask is around process. You may provide an answer which says, well, I go in and start with purpose and people, but you've worked as a consultant to several ambitious teams and companies. If you were going into a team or company and tasked with helping the organisation maybe turn their results around, where would you start?
What I've found, I think through my own experience, and even coming in here to the force-based ultimate experiences I had, is coming in with an open mind around how things are working there already. Because if it hasn't achieved a certain level of success, it could mean that there's a lot of fixing to do, or it might mean that they're just, a millimetre away, and some small tweaks are going to get things across the line. And so, there's an assumption if you are going in somewhere that hasn't been successful but wants to be successful, whatever that means, and however they choose to measure it, which is sometimes the starting point. You don't think you're successful. What's your measure of success? And reframing that can sometimes change things very, very quickly. But it's knowing what does it look like here? What is great here? What do people love about here? What's going well? And being able to step back and observe and see what's happening, because the risk is coming in with a preconceived idea of what you might be able to bring or what you might be able to do, or copy pasting a template and being. It's something that I'm always trying to be very aware of, is like, at the Crusaders we did this, and over in Austin we did that. And so, and it's hard because people ask too. They're like, well, how did you do this when you were there? And so it's a conscious effort to be able to go in and observe and listen and ask and get a real measure of what's happening now, and maybe the perception of what's gone well and what hasn't gone well, and then be able to take that into forming what you might be able to do to help, versus I've got a system, and when I come in and implement the system, you'll go from here to here in this amount of time, is unrealistic. It's a good sales tool, and it gets a lot of people in and out, and they'll go in and cash in and leave and go and do it at the next place, and whether they leave success or not, the selling my system model doesn't always work. And so it's being able to connect and form a way that you can be useful and you can be helpful based on what the needs are, rather than going in already decided on what you think you can add to that environment, how you can change it.
Yeah, definitely. And I always explain to companies, 70% of change initiatives aren't sustained, even if they're successful initially. And personally, I think a large contributor to that is that it's often a do it for you approach. And so I'm very clear in that I'm here to understand, and that this is a do it with you approach, because if you want this to be sustainable, if you generally want to achieve sustainable high performance, you guys have got to be giving 75, 80, 90%, and I'm purely here to help steer or maybe remove some blind spots or bias and provide you with the conditions to be able to achieve this yourselves. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how easy it is to copy and paste And I guess that's the beauty of, the diversity of experience that you've had and, that I've been fortunate to have working across different hemispheres, different cultures, different sports, even different sectors, business, military. It gives you a humility to appreciate, whilst the fundamental principles of world-class teams don't differ too much, the context is the real key, and taking the time to understand that before you offer any sort of suggestions or insights.
Yeah, and I think going in can be, there's probably two mindsets you have, is to either make yourself important or make yourself unimportant. And as a consultant, just going in to help a place grow, like your goal should be to make yourself obsolete. But some people have a mindset that it might be that they need the work, or they just like to be important sometimes. So you want to go in and create a dependency on you, so they have to keep bringing you back, whether it's because you do everything and then when you leave it all falls over, or it's just a need to be needed. But you want to be able to go in to grow, to set things up, to step away, that they brought you in to help, not to stay. And so you may become a permanent fixture there because you might just sit and it might evolve into a role. But that's I think it's a mindset that I would go into a lot of those the consultancy type roles where you're looking to help, is how can you help to facilitate the growth of local people in let's say it's a Singapore rugby environment at the moment, where I'm assisting the people who are there and they've had a history of fly someone in, pay them to do the work, that person leaves, and you're constantly turning people over, versus helping to grow locals that's going to be sustainable over time and build infrastructure that is local and there. So I'd say that's probably a mindset that for me is important to apply in those sort of scenarios. And like you said, if I go in and do it all, then it's a you thing, not a them thing or an us thing. And so there's the go and do it this way, then you leave. They don't do it that way because it's not theirs, it's yours. And when you're not there, like, oh, he's not here to do it, so we'll go back to how we were before, or we just chuck that in the bin. And that's something that a lot of consultants within the rugby environment within Japan struggle with too. You'll go in and you'll educate and implement on something, but then when they leave, it goes back to how it was. You come back, and then what's the next? And you're always going back. That's one thing I've found at times, is you go back and you represent on the same thing. And so it's being able to say, look, this isn't shifting. I'm not available full time, but I believe what you need is somebody here full time to help you on a daily basis to grow this, to be able to step away and being able to know where your skill set kind of fits and where you're able to contribute the way that they need, or where somebody else might be more available to contribute to the way that they need, so things are actually sustainable because you're not there full time to help implement the things that you build with them.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I mean, the only reason that I think I take that approach now is because I've done it the other way and I've been unsuccessful and it hasn't sustained, and you learn, don't you, most from your failure. It's cliche, but that's for me now one of the sort of defining values of the work that I do it's do it with you. And ultimately this is explained from the start. I want to, within 6, 12, however many months, make myself obsolete, as you say, and unnecessary. And that's when you've actually been able to instigate true change and transformation with that organization.
Yeah, which is sort of the fastest way to turn failure into success, is learn and grow. And then that's the part of the process and a part of the cycle.
No, definitely.
Then it's not failure anymore. In the past it was, but then it's not anymore.
That's it. Yeah, reframe it, and it's just one step closer to success, as cliche as it sounds.
Yes.
Awesome. So let's finish in a little bit, but first what I'd like to do is to do a word association game, if you're happy with that, just to give our viewers and listeners a little bit of a deeper dive into your thoughts around certain areas, and then we'll wrap this up. You happy with that?
Yeah.
So the first word, even though it's 2 words, we'll count it as one, is New Zealand.
Home comes to mind first.
Culture.
Equal.
Team.
Togetherness.
Maori.
Whakapapa.
Belonging.
Family.
Crusaders.
History.
Leadership.
Others.
Family.
Home.
Success.
Context.
Legacy.
Overrated.
Lovely. It's funny actually the amount of people that I say legacy to and they just go meh, and it's often put up in bright light. I guess the people that I'm speaking to on these podcasts are all highly ambitious people, yet there seems to be this detachment from legacy or what they can create and more so what they can contribute towards, not with like a view of being then given credit, 20, 30 years down the line for it. That humility.
Yeah, I think, different people have different drivers, and some people do really have that as a driver, and they want to be a part of a legacy or leave a legacy. As others, you come and go through it, and like say both are right and neither are wrong, but you start to see who it's important to and who it's not. It's like when you win a final, some people have been working all season, hating every big moment of the process to get that one moment after a final, and that's what they work for all year. And others, like myself, love the journey all the way there, and that moment's like 1 second, and then you start thinking like, right, next one. It's like, what's next? It's like, but you like to sit back, and I love to watch how much people love that moment and want to stay in that moment. But I don't know, maybe it's strange, but you just like, okay, awesome for them, they love that, but I like the stuff along the way. But neither is right and neither is wrong.
No, exactly. And if that allows you to stay loving what you do and bringing, your best self to it, then, you can utilize that.
Yeah, that's good. It's enjoyable seeing other people be successful in the way that they want to be.
100%. Mate, it's been awesome chatting. I've really enjoyed it, and there's some fantastic takeaways, for viewers and listeners, and even for myself. Like some really insightful stuff there, some really cool discussions around the work that you've done in creating that connection and that belonging and purpose, and some nice stories. And I always say this is really interesting to delve into stories of people, and people love to hear stories, but I think it's also important that they can go away with practical action steps and insights. And I think you've provided both of them, in spades. So I really appreciate your time.
Well, good. I've been fortunate to be surrounded by some pretty good people that I've drawn things out of too, but then had some good experiences along the way that are easy to recall and talk about. So, but yeah, it's been good. I think obviously like-minded as well. So resonate with a lot of the stuff that you're starting to pump out at the moment through business and the channels and enjoying it. So yeah, it's good to catch up and good to chat.
Thank you, my man. No, I appreciate it. Hey everyone, so it was really interesting to delve into some of those areas that we discussed today with Simon. Certainly it took me back to my experiences in New Zealand and that real obvious element of leaning on people and culture and purpose in order to create high performing teams, which was something I maybe hadn't seen to that same degree anyway I'd done before. So we discussed a whole variety of things, his learnings from ancient Maori wisdom, how to create a story that unites your people, how to ensure you have the right people on the bus in the first place, and how to create a culture where people put the organisation's success above their own self-interest. But there's two areas that I'd like to delve into here. So the first is the importance of having a purpose bigger than you. And Simon spoke about this, and great teams and companies connect people to something bigger than themselves. They often do this by leveraging storytelling regarding who they are, how they got here, and the future they want to see collectively. And the difference here is often whether people feel a part of this process or not. Simon spoke about the 3 steps necessary that he would take to align people within companies or teams. And that first step is in regards to the foundations, aka understanding who we are, what is our purpose, and if we had one already written down or in our minds, is it actually still relevant? And you need to involve people in this to ensure you operate from a place of commitment, not compliance within your company. Ensure you're creating an opportunity for people to feel heard, taking the steps to feel like they've had an input in the journey they're on, and not simply fulfilling the organization's journey or desires. The second step, once you've got that, is absolute clarity. So making sure everybody knows where we're going, what their role is in that, and that everyone actually wants to go on that journey too. It's really crucial here to understand whether people have clarity on their role and what it is they actually contribute towards the mission. So once you've got absolute clarity in regards to what everyone's role is, what we're actually trying to achieve here, and how we're going to do that, step 3 is turning these words into actions. So what does it look like? What actually are these values in regards to the behaviors and practices and processes that we build into our daily life? Are these things that are simply up on the wall? Is this just an aspirational goal that's used to attract people, and then when they get there, they don't actually feel like we're heading in that direction at all? These are all really crucial steps. We need to make sure that everything we've done in step 1 around foundations and step 2 around clarity are then turned into actions in step 3, and that these standards are upheld no matter the task. The second thing that I'd love to delve into that I thought was really interesting was one of the approaches that Simon and the team who was involved with at the time took towards connecting people remotely. He spoke about during COVID lockdown when he joined Texas Rugby as their head of performance, and to connect people remotely, the head coach at the time had everyone present their failure CV remotely. What this did was it helped to role model vulnerability, and that rapidly connected people and opened them up to be able to trust one another. By the time they came together, Simon stated that they'd already felt connected and valued as part of that collective group. He also explained when they came together the difference between formal inductions and informal inductions, and I thought this was really important to clarify on for companies and leaders out there in the business space. So formal inductions are inductions that we know and see. They're the usual introductions, upskilling procedures, etc., that kind of thing, normally quite admin heavy. Informal inductions are what new people see in regards to the behaviours that you perform every single day. What are the behavioural norms? What is accepted? What is normalised? Because slowly, new hires' behaviour will drift towards a cultural norm. And that's where having really clearly done step 3 by turning these inspiring words and values and mission into actionable behaviours is crucial, and then holding people to those high standards that were collectively agreed in the first place. So that's it for today, guys. Really hope you enjoyed the conversation and the episode. And if you did, please remember to like and subscribe and share it with anyone else that you think might be interested too. Have a great day, and we'll catch up soon.